Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is afternoon, I hope, where everybody is. And I'm excited to have Shoshona S M Freedman back again. We were here almost exactly to the date last year talking about the day she died. And I am so excited to talk about Blood Atonement. If any of you haven't read it, it is honestly one of the most exciting books I've read this year. And I'm thrilled that Shoshona is back with us this year. Before we officially get started, I'm going to share a land acknowledgement from where Kaylee and I are, and then Shoshona is going to share a land acknowledgement from where she is, and then we'll jump right in. Junction Reads exists in Tikaranto, which for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Wendat Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. I forgot to do this. We are very grateful for the opportunity to have the opportunity to work in this community. And I'm really sorry. We literally just talked about not messing this up, and I cut and copied an old land acknowledgement. So apologies. Shoshona, if you'd like to share.
All right. So I'm in Vancouver. I'm grateful to live and work on the ancestral unceded territory of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish Coast Salish peoples. And I strive to honor this legacy with respect and compassion.
Thank you very much. Isn't that always the way? We honestly just talked
totally
about that. And that's
yourself.
just asking for it, begging for something to go wrong.
I know. What could go wrong?
Oh, nothing. We've been doing this for so long now.
Right.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us again. I really and truly mean it when I say this was one of the most exciting books I've read this year. I am thrilled to have you back. But before we officially get started, this is when I steal all of your great ideas and ask you what you're reading right now.
What I'm reading right now. Okay, so I have like a huge pile and I don't have it all beside me. It might, if I did have it beside me, it might like fall over and crush me. That would be really bad. So I'm going to give you the two that I've read in the last like 2-ish plus weeks. Last One Alive, Amber Cowie. This is an amazing book. It's very like isolated West Coast feel. They're searching for this evidence of a legacy of a witch. It's gorgeous. It's so good. And then I like plowed through this in 2 days straight. Are You Sarah? Yeah. S.C. Lally. So great. So I highly recommend that. Now, then the next ones I'm going to read, I've actually gotten myself more organized. I'm like, I write down a list. I'm like, this is what I'm reading. And then this is what I'm reading. And then sometimes I get like distracted and go, oh, shiny book. But
yeah,
the time I'm like, I'm getting very focused. So
good for you.
Next on my list is J.T. Simons. And this is To Those Who Killed Me. And the third in A.J. Devlin's Hammerhead Jed series, which is 5 Moves of Doom. And I don't have it beside me, but Meredith Hambrook's book, and I'm gonna blank on its title because I keep wanting to call it something else. But Meredith
Kaylee will find it and share it with everybody.
Yeah, so I've got that on my list. Those are the 3 that I'm gonna focus on the next month, I guess.
Good for you. Are you a fast reader, or would you? Yeah,
I'm terribly, terribly, terribly slow. And I'm also really easily distracted. And I think I've gotten more so in the last few years, which probably not a good sign, but I really do get very distracted and easily, like, even when I'm really enjoying a book, I do find my brain starts to wander into all the other things that I'm needing to do, or things I'm researching, or what I'm working on, or family stuff. And so I actually find I have to take a lot more breaks now.
Yeah. The distraction thing is I am currently reading Bunny, which was gifted to me by Kevin, who's up there watching. And when I went to the UK, I thought, well, I'll I'll just read Bunny. But then I walked into Waterstones and bought another book, and it's terrible that I don't know if it's distraction or if it's desire to read everything and then just not actually reading.
Well, there's that too, for
And
sure. 'Cause
yeah,
there's so many great books. Like I have a stack, and there's some books that I bought like 2 years ago, and I'm like, I need to read this. I'm so excited to read this, and I just never get to it. Now,
yeah,
sometimes it's because like some of the reading I do, even though it's all very much for enjoyment, it's also kind of for work, right?
right,
Like
yeah.
there's authors that I know or I'm doing events with or whatever, and I always want to read their work. So
Mhm.
those kind of end up at the top of the TBR pile, and then the ones that are, I don't have a timeline where it's like I really should read this
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
Kind of keep staying down below, even though I really do want to read them. So
yeah. I'm the same.
yeah.
I'm the same. I am excited to hear you read from Blood Atonement. But before I do, can I share your biography with everybody?
Please, yes. Who is this woman?
Yes, yes. S M Freedman studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York before working as a private investigator for many years. She is the author of 4 novels. The Faithful was an international Amazon bestseller, and it reached the quarterfinals in the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award. It was also selected by Suspense Magazine as a best debut of 2015. The sequel, Impact Winter, followed in 2016, and the final installment in the series, The Day She Died, was published by Dundurn in 2021. And if you want to learn more about that, you can check out the video on our Junction Reads YouTube channel. Blood Atonement was just published by Dundurn Press literally weeks ago. She lives in Vancouver with her husband and 2 children, and she is also a proud member of Sisters in Crime, Crime Writers of Canada, International Thriller Writers, and Mystery Writers of America.
Thank you.
Hoda.
Okay, so you want me to read, right?
Yes,
So,
please.
okay, so Blood Atonement, which is the book we're here about. It's the story of Grace DeRoche, who grows up in a sect of the FLDS, which is the fundamentalist Mormon church. If you're not aware of those, I think there's a lot more awareness right now because of a couple of specials that have come out. Netflix has Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey. Hulu's Under the Banner of Heaven. So they're the religious sect that believes in plural marriage still, and there's a lot of abuse and horrible stuff that goes on within this sect. The women are very much held at a lesser level and are meant to keep sweet and serve their priesthood heads, the men in their compound, and so on. So Grace escapes a fundamentalist Mormon church sect near the true one in Bountiful, BC. And she manages to help several other children escape. There are 10 of them in total. And years later, some of the people she escaped with are starting to die under suspicious circumstances. And Grace has to determine if one of her alter personalities is possibly a murderer because the evidence is pointing in her direction, or whether she's actually slated to be the next victim. So I'm choosing to read the very beginning of the book as the prologue. And the reason I'm doing that is this book kind of goes back and forth in time. It tells the story from Grace's childhood as well as the present day as she's trying to figure out what is happening. And so there's a kind of a classic whodunit mystery as well. But this moment here is the moment where Grace changes her life. She goes from being locked in the sect for the first 18 years of her life to becoming a hero and saving herself and saving the other kids as well. So it's really a moment of transition for her. And here we go. Grace was cleaning blood from her thighs when the police raided Brigham for the last time. At first, she paid little attention to the shouting outside the trailer window. She needed to finish what she was doing before her husband came home demanding dinner. She'd propped herself over the toilet, one hip wedged into the side of the sink and her back pressed against the shower door. Her legs shook, her hands trembled, her brain was hot with fever and her good ear buzzed. Someone pounded on the side of the trailer, causing the walls to rattle. She lurched backward and grabbed the edge of the sink to keep from falling. Bloody rags splatted on the floor. Grace, hurry! The police are here, Desiree said. The police. Now she heard the shouting, the crying, the chaos as children scattered into the forest. I'm here, I'm coming. Be quick. Her dress hung from the hook by the sink, pale green with yellowed lace trim, but there was no time for her to get dressed. She grabbed a throw blanket from the foot of the bed and wrapped it around herself to cover her blood-soaked temple undergarments. The world tipped sideways and slowly righted itself. Staggering forward, she somehow made it to the door and slammed a shoulder into it, unsticking the warped aluminum from its frame. She tumbled off balance down the outside stairs and would have fallen if her sister hadn't caught her. Come on! Desiree grabbed her arm and pulled. They ran beneath a moon that was low and bright in the sky. Once Grace's eyes adjusted, she could see perfectly well, which meant she could also be seen perfectly well. At the edge of the cornfield, reason or madness asserted itself. Wait! Desiree spun to face her, her eyes wide with panic. What are you doing? We have to go. Her sister's hair was pulled into a classic roll on top of the head and braided down her back. She panted, her bosom pressed against the cotton of her high-collared dress. Pimples dotted her chin. How long until Uncle G had a revelation about Desiree's marriage? She was already a year older than Grace had been. Desiree glanced toward the road. Come on, they're catching up. This was true. The beams of their flashlights danced like fireflies as the police approached. Their voices grew louder. She felt Desiree's panic, could feel it swell within her own chest. The urge to keep running was almost overwhelming. It's what they'd been taught to do. They needed to protect their way of life, their chance at heaven, their prophet. But blood trickled down her legs again. And more than anything, she wanted a better life for her sister. She grabbed Desiree's hands. Hers blazed with fever. Desiree's felt like ice. This is our chance. Realization and fear blossomed in Desiree's eyes. She shook her head and tried to pull her hands free. We shouldn't. Grace squeezed. We must. But what about father and mother? Grace's chest tightened with anxiety and guilt, but she shook her head. Too far down that path and she'd decide to stay. Then her only way out would be death. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Truth was so hard to speak. She'd been raised to be sweet, and the words burned like acid on her tongue. She almost gagged on the enormity of what escaped her lips. If I have to stay here any longer, I'll die. So will you. How long until you're married? Oh, Grace, Desiree's eyes swam with tears. You're 14. Your revelation is coming any day now. Maybe I'll be lucky like our parents were. Until Mother Rebecca joined the family. Desiree swallowed hard. Was it just a game to you? Grace asked. The police drew closer, the beams from their flashlights weaving and flickering. I know you're scared, but we can't waste this chance. The others will be waiting for us. Desiree licked her lips, bobbing her head up and down. All right, if they're really there, I'll do it. She wrapped an arm around her sister's waist, and together they ran along the edge of the cornfield. As Grace had predicted, the others were huddled beneath the scarecrow on the far end. But a quick head count told her only 8 had made it. Grace rubbed a trembling hand across her brow. It came away wet. Her bones felt hollow, and she could barely hear over the ringing in her good ear. Where's Soraya? No answer, just 8 sets of eyes begging for her leadership. Oh no, Desiree's jaw tightened, and spittle flew from her mouth. Sorry, one sec. Her stammer always got worse under stress. I'm gonna mute. Slight coughing attack off screen. There's no time, we have to go, Rulon said. He was Uncle G's sixth son and her husband's half-brother. They had the same blonde hair, pale eyes, but her husband was salt to Rulon's sugar. Desiree spoke through her fingers. We can't just leave. It won't be for long, Rulon said. Once we tell our story, they'll come back to rescue the rest. Maybe she's already waiting on the road, Tabby said. Joseph Barlow spotted them and strode across the cornfield in their direction. What are you doing there? All of you, to the forest. Hurry, everyone, buddy up, Grace said. Stay with me. Hey, Barlow shouted after them. They rolled like thunder across the fields and gravel, linked hand to hand. Grace's legs trembled with exertion, threatening to collapse beneath her. But the others depended on her, so she pushed forward. They made it to the main road with no sign of Soraya. Up close, the police looked terrifying. They moved in formation, wearing dark helmets and thick vests. One by one, she felt the others slow, paralyzed by the same fear that bloomed inside her own chest. This was their enemy in the flesh. Then an officer stepped out of formation and pulled off his helmet. He had a shock of dark hair above a broad face. Their eyes met, and his arms opened as though in welcome. She squeezed Desiree's hand and pulled Tabby close. The girls trembled against her side, thin as sparrows. Don't be afraid, God is with us. She ran toward the officer's open arms, and the children followed.
Thank you. That's so funny. Just before you started coughing, I sneezed, and like just a millisecond before you did it. And so when you coughed right after my sneeze, I was like, oh no, did I?
It was your fault.
Start some kind of virtual.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That is, I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, was such an incredible opening. So quick and so dynamic. I loved it. I want to talk to you about, there's two things in the novel that I felt while reading. I was impressed, I guess, by how much research must have gone into writing this novel and how much sensitivity you needed to put into that research, because FLDS, as you mentioned, there was a fictional town close to Bountiful, but there are actual, like Warren Jeffs is named, there are actual characters whose names are the people in real life. So I wanted to talk first about the FLDS and how did you approach that research? Because they definitely come across as the bad guys, but not in the same way that they're depicted in the media, like as a evil. I mean, there's definitely an evil component in the novel, but how much research?
So with the FLDS stuff, because I also had to do a lot of research on the psychology, like for Grace's dissociative identity disorder. But in terms of the actual FLDS, I started with all the basics, and I, of course, there's a lot on Netflix and Hulu now, but that wasn't around when I was writing this. So I had to do my research the old fashioned way. So I started with all the basics of learning what they believe, what's happened to them throughout their history, like what happened when they split off from the rest of the Mormon church and went their own way, when they decided, no, we're not going to give up plural marriage, and how that kind of isolated them over the years and created a sect that was more and more isolated and more cult-like over time. So I did that, but then what I really wanted was I wanted the humanity behind it, because these people, most of them are being raised in this. They don't have the opportunity to think a different way. They're raised in this world. And so I read as many memoirs as I could get my hands on. I told stories of what it was like to grow up in the FLDS and what happened to them. And one of the ones that sticks out to me is Elisa Wall's memoir. Now, I can't remember the title, but her name is Elisa Wall, and she grew up in the FLDS in I believe it was Colorado or Utah. I can't remember where she lived. And she just really struck me as like, she's such a lovely person. And actually there was a lot of love in her family.
Mhm.
And that I think was part of what inspired it, because I didn't want them to be just a black and white evil. A lot of them aren't. They're brainwashed. But, do they love their children? Yes, in their way, they do. Well, does that mean they'll protect their child from being married off at 13? No, it doesn't. So there's a lot of gray area there. And I wanted to try and capture that as the true reality of it, as opposed to sensationalizing it.
There was, in particular, in Grace and Desiree's family, I mean, the dynamic changed when Mother Rebecca joined, but there was, so I loved the love between Grace and her dad. That was just so sincere and so difficult to read, because, as you say, she is married off at 13, and there are scenes where as just a regular mom, I'm thinking, how is this possible that
Mhm.
this mom is just letting her kid go, especially to Boydell, who
Yeah,
is clearly evil personified.
yeah,
But yeah, I want to thank you for giving that
yeah.
perspective, because there is a lot in the media, and people can believe that the parents uh, in particular are just as evil as Warren Jeffs, and it's simply not
And
true.
they're not. They are
Yeah.
truly, I mean, I'm sure, some of them are like in everything, but they're truly brainwashed. They
Hmm.
truly believe that if they do not follow, and women especially, they have no voice. They have
Right.
absolutely no voice. You keep sweet, and that means don't even think those bad thoughts. You
Yeah.
eradicate them from your mind. You keep sweet, you serve your prophet. You serve
Yeah.
your priesthood head, which is your husband.
Hmm.
They truly believe that if that husband doesn't gain 3 wives before the end of days or before he dies, whichever comes first,
Yeah.
um, they're not going to heaven. Like,
Right.
they have these beliefs that are so crazy as an
Hmm.
outsider, so crazy to an outside perspective. But the truth of the matter is, that's what they think.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you mentioned the dissociative identity disorder. Grace suffers an incredible amount of trauma, which I want to talk to you separately about after this. But how challenging was that? And again, it's that bringing in what what personally of childhood and all that kind of stuff, topped off with the trauma that results in Grace having multiple personalities living inside of her.
Yeah.
How was that researched, and how did you?
Intensely.
Yes, yeah.
Intensely. And the more I learned about, because it started out with just a fascination with, well, what is that, and I wanted to know more. And For me, it really became important that I not sensationalize this disorder, because
Mm,
this is something brilliant that the brain does to compartmentalize away trauma. And it happens
mhm,
when there is systemic childhood abuse. And so I did not want to sensationalize that. I wanted to write it as truly and accurately as I possibly could.
mhm,
And do it in honor, because the people who are suffering from this are suffering from this because of things that have happened to them. And I did not want to use that as fodder. And I was very, very careful in how I portrayed the abuse, in that I made a decision early on. I am not putting any of this on the page.
mhm,
I'm going to use Grace's dissociation as a tool to hide from the reader exactly what's happening.
mhm.
So I'm not going to write it. I just didn't want to do that. And hopefully I found the balance so that I could, it's obvious what's happened without actually having to like read it.
Yeah, yeah. And that was, I think, the brilliance in some of those scenes. I mean, as difficult, the past was difficult to read. But again, because you went back and forth, we kind of had a reprieve, and this sense that despite, you know, she's living with Harris, who's a personality that's very protective of her, and Alex, who's a personality that, you know, we're not too sure about, and whomever else is with her, we still have to go back and find out what happened to Grace. And those scenes with Uncle G were incredible, because as you say, you didn't write it on the page. You didn't say anything on the page, but there's just words that come out of his mouth, and the ointment and all of those scenes. How did you know? I'm sure you knew before you started writing that this would have happened to Grace. This would have happened to a number of women, girls, children, in the FLDS. How did you know that you weren't going to go there, that you just weren't going to, as you say, sensationalize it with
I just wouldn't have
trauma right
written
on
the
the page?
story. I would
Yeah.
not have written that story if I had to write it that way. Is one of these things I'm just not going to do it,
Mhm.
because I still expect that this is a book that somebody who's experienced abuse and trauma probably shouldn't read.
Mhm.
It's going to be triggering. But for everybody else, I wanted to bring awareness of it without like getting awful about
Mhm.
it. And if I couldn't have figured out a way to do it, and I was very careful in edits as well, like, remove that sentence, change that word. I really nitpicked myself,
Mhm.
um, almost to death, just to try and make sure that I was reaching a limit. I was hitting, like I was getting there. It was obvious without me being graphic about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of what makes the novel successful is this, and you did this with The Day She Died as well. And I haven't read your other books, but there, in some crime novels, there can be a perspective or a voice that is kind of distant, like an omniscient,
Right.
that jumps in and out of certain characters in the novel. But in Blood Atonement, there's an intimacy to the third person, and it's not, exclusive to Grace. It's not exclusive to any one character, but when we go back, it really does feel like we're there, and not just fly on the wall there, but that we're, a character standing among all of the characters. How did the voice come to you? How did you know that this was how you were going to tell the story?
That's a good question, because I actually, in like copy edits, when there's no real going back now, right? I start to go,
Yeah.
why didn't I write this in first person? Like the later two books I've written, which are of course not published yet, they're in first person, and it's like I've made a switch at some point to going, I just want to be as intimate with this person
Mhm.
as possible. So I think even when I write third person, which I have for the first 4 books that I wrote, I'm really still writing it like I'm very much third person close. And I can't imagine, there's so many other ways to write. And when I read something in a book that's omniscient or whatever, and I'm like, that's incredible, I don't know how to do that. I want to be like right there, like inside that person's head.
Yeah.
um I want the reader to be. I don't want to be
Yeah.
on a wall somewhere over here.
Yeah. But you also do that so well with Bo, right? Like Bo is, for those of you who haven't read the book, the detective, the one who uh, comes in to solve the murders of some of the adult kids who escaped, adult
Yeah.
now kids who escaped.
Yeah,
Um,
and you met him just for a moment because he's the officer who stepped out of line and opened his arms to her.
yes,
And
right.
then many years later, he's the detective trying to figure it all out. Yeah.
Yeah, and he really comes alive in this book, so much so that I have a question about whether he's going to come back in another book, because his wife's death was a um you know a Chekhov's gun kind of thing, where I thought, are we ever going to find out what happened to his wife? And then I'm going to
I
ask
don't know, you're giving me ideas.
I'm like, is
That's a
Bo
good idea. I
well,
should record
right?
Bo again.
It isn't her death isn't overtly addressed, but anyway, more to Bo's the perspective on Bo's life. It was very close too, and the intimacy that he felt with Shelby, and that the moments that he has with her, I thought were really powerful. And so I wanted to know at what point did you think to yourself, I'm going to give a little bit more of Bo. I'm going to fill out him a lot more than
I think
other characters.
I think right from the beginning, I knew I needed to have a detective. I didn't want her to be, with everything that she's gone through and the things that she's suffering from, and the fact that she's often not really with herself, and
Yeah.
another person I say, I didn't want her to be this, I've got to be the detective of my own story here. I didn't want her to have to be out there trying to figure it out. It's too
Mhm.
much for her. And so I did have that image of him being the detective who helped her. And of course, a lot of that doesn't actually happen in the story. It's
Mhm.
background, but he's the one who helped her after she escaped. He's the one who was trying to to prosecute the members of Brigham, and then of course they committed a mass suicide, and that was the end of the story, so to speak, for them, although did all of them really die?
Mhm.
And that becomes part of the mystery. But I needed him there to do the investigation. I needed him to propel that um modern part of the story, the present chapters,
Mhm.
and follow through. And honestly, that was the hardest part in the whole story for me, was writing his chapters. Every time I was writing her chapters, especially in the past, it just flowed, it flowed, it flowed. It was really,
Yeah.
it was emotional stuff, but it flowed. I was completely making it up. And then based on the parameters of what I knew from my research. But then with Bo, I had to stop and think, okay, all right, what would a really smart RCMP detective do? Not what would I do, what would he do? And that was a lot more challenging, and researched. And I did reach out to some RCMP members and make sure I was doing things right. But
Mhm.
that the procedural part of it is a challenge for me. So
Yeah. No, and there I just even, in one instance he makes the decision to leave a bar. Like he just gets up and leaves. I
yeah,
thought, wow, that is such a telling and important little personality
yeah,
trait that you did so well.
yeah. He was having feelings he didn't want to have.
That's
I'm out.
right. Yeah, exactly. I have a couple more questions, everybody. I always forget, and now I guess it's just become what we do. If you have any questions, please feel free to either direct message Kaylee or just put them in the chat, and Kaylee will ask on your behalf. Um, I want to talk about because I read, and you can tell me where I read this, that your mom is the reader you want to trick.
Oh
If
yeah,
you can get one over on her,
yeah,
then you've done your job.
yeah.
And I want to talk to you about a writerly thing, the twists and the revelations, because only on reading it a second time do you go, oh, right. I
Right.
guess if I hadn't been reading these 4 chapters at midnight with jet lag, I would have got it the first time.
Yeah.
But it's only when you read a thriller the second time that you see all of the little
Yep.
things. Yeah. So how do you do that? And given your goal of needing your mother to not know,
Mhm.
who done it at before the last few pages. Is that part of your structure? Is that part of your plot outline?
Um, it is, although I actually, my mom, I have not fooled her yet. And the reason being, because she is a key tool. She's so smart. Like, she's read more mysteries than I could probably ever lay my hands on. So she reads an earlier version than what
Right.
somebody is eventually reading once it's published. So she'll be telling me, okay, I figured this out here, and I'm like, oh,
Right.
okay. Because it's the red herrings, you have to be so careful about where you put them, how you put them, that changing one word makes all the difference. And
Mhm.
this time I was too subtle, that time I was too obvious, and you got to kind of balance it. And I find that's a lot of times what happens in my rewrites and drafts and editing is like, oh, what if I put a sentence here, just like fit that in there, and does that does that give too much away? Like, it's really finding a balance, and it's not something that happens in that first draft or second draft or even probably third draft. I'm always being too obvious, or I'm being too subtle, or kind of something in between, like it's like, oh, that was too obvious and that I didn't get at all. So because you
Yeah.
want the reader to like go through and at that end moment go, oh, right. But if they
Right.
go,
Yeah.
ooh, that's bad, right? Like,
Yeah,
oh, bad
exactly.
guy is this person you didn't pay, I don't even remember who they are. Like, then you've kind of messed it up.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I mean, you're either going to frustrate a reader by giving away too much,
Yeah,
or frustrate a reader by, having them spend 400 pages going, I have no idea.
right.
I don't even care at this point.
Right.
But yeah.
I've
So
had
let's
that
talk.
happen before, and I won't even
Yeah.
I won't not ever say a bad thing about anybody's book, just so you know, it's like bad
Oh
karma.
yeah, no.
So, I mean, if I say something, but I will never tell you what book it was. But I had that happen once where I read this book and I'm like, and it was a, classic whodunit. And
Yeah.
I got to the end and I'm like, who? Like, I didn't, that
Yeah.
guy was, oh, he was so inconsequential that, you broke a contract with the reader. It has
Yes.
to be somebody who's important.
Yep.
And it can't be somebody that just kind of randomly comes along at the end.
Yeah, exactly. And in circumstances where you go, no way.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah.
Yeah.
No, you did that so well. And I want to talk about, again, from a writer to a writer, 400 pages.
Yeah.
I was amazed, to be perfectly honest, because sometimes I pick up a book and it's 400 pages.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, Kevin. And I go, how am I going to do this? And yet, with his book and with your book, you're like, oh, I'm done. How did you do that?
Really
What,
big printing. No.
in the pace, like, you're just like, as a reader going forward, going forward, going forward. And then suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, I just read, and I'm a slow reader.
Me
So
too.
for me, if I sit down and read 125 pages in one sitting, I'm shocked. I shocked myself. And that's what I felt with Blood Atonement, that I was just like, really didn't want to put it down. And when I say jet lagged at midnight and really not wanting to go to bed, that was the case. I couldn't. So how, again, is that? What was the maximum word count in all of the drafts?
Oh gosh.
Page
I know.
numbers.
I think it was upwards of 90. It might have been 92,000.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember what it actually worked out to be, because when you finally see your page proofs and stuff, it's not in a Word format anymore where you can see that at the bottom, the little box where it
Yeah.
says words. It's on PDF or what have you. And so I'm not quite sure where it ended up, but I think it was around 92 to begin with. Yeah.
Wow.
That's what I tend to write though. Like I tend to 90s. I'm usually in the 90s.
Really?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
The Day
And
She Died was the shortest book I ever wrote.
wow. And that's, I mean, The Day She Died was also a paced novel. Like, that was a fast moving novel.
And that was a really short novel, actually. That The Day She Died was so short that my agent was like, you need to add some stuff. Like,
Oh,
it was
really?
too short for its category. Yeah. Which is not something that's ever happened to me again. And I don't expect
Really?
it ever will. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's mystery thrillers have their own category of,
Yeah. Like somewhere between, I guess 80 and 100. And The Day
yeah,
She Died was like 70, I think. And
right.
I had to bulk it out a little bit.
So how, because for me, I was thinking that you're looking at this 92,000 page manuscript and thinking, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to do this? But it must be worse to have 70,000 and then have to add 10,000 to.
It was, because and thankfully she was able to say, I think you could add some in this kind of part of the story, or you
Mhm,
could add this aspect, and it was fine. I was able to layer it in. But and I'm not like, I'm a fairly clean writer too.
mhm.
So it's not like, well, I've become more of a clean writer. My first book, The Faithful, topped out at like 100 and I think it was 144,000 when like the first draft.
Jeez.
It was so wordy, and it was like, oh, like, but you don't know what you're doing, right? It was my first, and I had to cut a lot from that, and a lot of just stuff that needed to be cut.
Mhm.
But at this point, usually I'm somewhere in the low 90s, and still fairly tight. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was definitely easy to read. There are many 400-page books that are not easy to read.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So before we talk about what you're working on next, and hopefully what we're going to be talking about this time next year,
Oh,
um,
see this one.
Kaylee, I know, Kaylee, we have a couple of questions.
Yeah, so the first question is, you mentioned that you read a lot for work, so you end up reading a lot in the mystery, thriller, horror space. Do those happen to be your favorite genres, or do you reach for other genres when you're not working?
I'm really quite a horror, mystery, thriller person. And it's funny, for reading, that's where I'm at. I'm not as much that when it comes to shows or movies. I'll tend to go lighter. I mean, I will enjoy a good thriller or what have you. I'm not at all a horror watcher. And so I think I just need different things from those two different mediums. Like if I'm watching something, it's like I want something light and comedic and relaxing. And if I'm reading something, I want to be engrossed and, possibly not be able to sleep well that night. And yeah, so I really do read within those genres, but I do love a good detective mystery or private eye stories. I love those too. Like Sue Grafton, for
Mhm.
example. I love her. I love the whole Kinsey Mahone series. So I love and I enjoy a good cozy mystery every once in a while too. But I'm not a huge like romance reader or anything like that. As much as I might enjoy watching a rom-com, I don't tend to read that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so funny because I'm obsessed with the Harlequin movies,
Oh
but
yeah.
I don't, that's not the kind of stuff I read either. Like
Yeah.
it's like a completely different world. And I just dawned on me now that listening to you say that.
Yeah. I don't know. It's something I've got very different needs in reading as
Mhm.
opposed to watching something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. We have one more so far, though feel free to ask any in the chat if anyone has more. And the question is, when is the best time for the twist or gotcha moment in a mystery or thriller novel, in your opinion?
Okay. Well, obviously usually right near the end. Um, it's, if you do it too soon, then you've got too much wrapping up, and why are you doing that? So, I would say, I mean, I think with this one, it's the second to last chapter. I mean, it's spaced out over several chapters, where there's some buildup because I'm going back and forth between Beau's point of view and Grace's point of view. But that's definitely in the latter part of the book. I'd say like in the 90th or so 95th part, percentage of the book. Oh my gosh, I'm doing so much math today.
No, yeah.
My brain hurts.
Yeah, there was definitely a moment probably at the halfway mark where I thought I knew who was doing it, and then I was wrong. And
Oh, you're
then
on roll.
mm,
That's awesome.
and then yeah, and usually, and I am actually very good at this when I watch TV shows or when I watch um uh mysteries and stuff on TV. I'm usually like I mean, it has more to do with the fact that they hire, you know, popular actors to play the killer, which to me
Sure.
is a big problem. But
Right.
yeah, and then I thought it was someone else at around the 75% mark and
Awesome.
was also wrong.
Yay! I love to hear
So,
that.
yeah. Hmm.
Huh, That's awesome.
Yeah, that was good. Is that it, Kaylee? Okay, let's talk about what you're working on right now.
Okay. So I don't have anything in the gears towards publication. I have 2 books that I have finished writing and am now working on deep rewrites on, and hopefully at some point soon my agent will be able to get them out on submission, which is, you know, to the publishers, and hopefully somebody in this century decides they want to buy it. So yeah, there's 2. So one of them is a story that centers around a family with a young child, a 5-year-old, who is having past life memories. And so that's actually more of a historical thriller, because we go back in time with his memories and forward into them trying to cope with everything that's happening. And
Very cool.
so that's quite a complex story, but that needs a deep rewrite. And then the other one I wrote is it's called Changeling, at least at the moment. And it's very much steeped in Jewish mysticism, which I'm quite fascinated by, and has a lot to do with, you know, it's about a baby gets stolen, which is what a changeling is, especially in the Jewish, because the changelings in different cultures, but is a baby that gets stolen by a demon to be used for infernal purposes. Anyway, so I wrote this. I actually, it was a finalist in ECW Press's speculative novel award. It didn't win, but it got to the finalists stage. And I was still really bothered by it. I really didn't like, there was something wrong with it. And it kind of has occurred to me in the last 6 months, probably less, it just feels like 6 months, that the problem with the story is that it's meant to be YA, it's meant to be young adult. And I was writing it as an adult story. And as soon as that occurred to me, I've been like, I really just don't want to, no, I don't want to think about that. But it stuck with me. And now it's like, oh, well, yeah, okay, that's what it's supposed to be. So I'm rewriting that as a YA, which is basically completely tearing the whole thing apart and starting again.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm excited about it. I feel like I've kind of solved the problem of what was wrong with it. And hopefully that will be the beginning of a series if there is interest in that. So
Yeah.
it's a rewriting I'm doing.
Exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and a great pleasure to talk about Blood Atonement. I want everybody to go out and find a copy and read it, because it really is a page turner. Definitively a page turner. So we are going to raffle off a copy right now, and we will raffle off another copy donated to us by Dundurn Press. If you have already read Blood Atonement, you can still win and nominate someone else. The book can be sent directly to them from Dundurn. So Kaylee will do that raffle, and then stay tuned on our social media channels for how to win another copy.
All right, it's always my favorite part. Gosh, they're stuck. All right, our winner for today is, okay, and I'm gonna try, Joanna Vander Vloot. Yay! It's always a gamble.
That's awesome. Joanna, if you haven't read the book, please send me via email, Junction Writes, not Reads, Junction Writes, WRITES@gmail.com, your name and address, and I will share that with the publicity team at Dundurn, and they can send that out to you. And if you would like to nominate somebody else, just share their name and address, and it can be sent directly to them. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you so much for having me here again.
Thank you. honestly. Like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been great. And thank you to the meteorological gods for not turning that
Oh gosh.
storm. Yeah.
Atmospheric river.
Atmospheric river. I couldn't remember. And it's funny when you first mentioned it to me, I thought I'm going to go look that up. That's an interesting.
Right? Yeah.
And of course, I completely forgot what it is.
Getting lots of those around here now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining us. We are back on November 13th with Margaret Novacek. She's going to share her memoir, Chasing Zebras, with us. But you can find out everything about our upcoming schedule at junctionreads.ca. There's a lot happening, and there might be changes. If we can find a venue, we may be changing from the online platform to in person, but fingers crossed, we'll see. Thank you so much again, Shoshona, for joining us.
Allison.
Thanks. Thank you to Kaylee for all the hard work she does in the background, and thanks everybody for coming. Have a good night. Bye.